Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. I'm Menners. I'm joined, of course, by my co-host Paul Dennett. Paul, good evening.
G'day, manners. G'day, everyone. Just as I started to speak, I almost choked. That's a very auspicious start to the show. But yeah, wonderful time of year. 1 week away from summer.
Absolutely. We're recording this on Thursday, the 24th of November. I've come off a massive day of commentary in the Sheffield Shield. Did like 2 stints, and then the Blues were bundled out by Western Australia. So that's it for first class cricket in New South Wales until the end of the Big Bash. Did you catch any of it, Paul, or were you busy working?
I was busy working, unfortunately, but it sounds as though, New South Wales' pretty ordinary season isn't getting any better.
Yep, they've only won one game all year, so they have a lot of internal. They need to look internally, I think. But we have got a massive show tonight. There is so much news. We're going to preview the West Indies Test series that begins next week. There's a ton of, very heavy headlines involving Justin Langer, former CA executives, and also the Big Bash. So it's a meaty show, Paul. I hope you're ready for it. But let's start with something that just made me feel good this week. I don't know why, but basically, in the wake of India's exit in the T20 World Cup semi-final, the BCCI has sacked all their selectors, all 5 shown the door. I like it. I think Australian cricket needs that kind of reaction sometimes.
Yeah, you might be surprised, but I think I'm going to agree with you. You wouldn't want to do it all the time. That you end up with chaos. Like you see that in a bit of in the Premier League in England. Like it's kind of like a manager loses 2 games and they're sacked. But I think that maybe we've got the balance a little bit too far the other way. I think I've said it on this show before. One of my favourite anecdotes, and again, apologies, Menace, it's about another sport, but of Ange Postecoglou, the Aussie who's currently doing great things managing Celtic in Scotland. During his first season, when things were going really, really well, and he had invited his best friends who he hadn't seen for 3 or 4 years all to a dinner in Glasgow. And it so happened that same day, Celtic lost to their arch rivals Rangers in the Scottish FA Cup semi-final, which was disappointing, but it wasn't that major a thing, I wouldn't have thought, because the side was doing so well elsewhere. But Ange said he was so devastated he couldn't attend the dinner, and his wife had to sort of host in his absence. And it was like lifelong friends that he then forewent the opportunity to see because he was just in too dark a place as his side had lost. And I sort of said this before the World Cup. Will the Australian selectors, did they feel that way the day that Australia exited the World Cup? Were they sitting there thinking they can't do anything? I don't think they were. So I think that, especially when they make a decision that I think was not justified by the evidence of continuing to pick Finch, I think there needs to be a little bit more accountability. Maybe we do need to say that if you're going to pick a side and it doesn't perform, there will be questions asked and potentially this sort of action takes place.
Yep. So good one at BCCI. If you're in India and fancy yourself as a selector, apply with them and maybe you can find yourself on their 5-person selection panel.
And
All
also,
right. Well,
just
yes.
build on that before that. Like, people are going to
Are
think
you
I'm
going
an
to apply?
No, but what I'm going to say is we've got now some of the most complex algorithms in the world in cricket. That Duckworth Lewis. We've got the Crick Viz, the Win Viz, the way that they calculate who's likely to win a match. Surely something could be done like that for selecting a team, not to pick the team necessarily, but this is not a joke, but a clever algorithm that says based on smart assessment of the statistics, this would be the Australian side. They don't have to pick that. But if they do pick someone who, maybe the algorithm says would be well down the list, they need to justify why they've chosen to go against what the numbers would say. And then if the team doesn't do so well, maybe that's when they do face a bit of job loss possibility. Or if they pick someone who the algorithm doesn't favour and they do brilliantly, then they get an extra bonus or something.
I like it. And, we're talking about George Bailey and Tony Donamaid, who are selecting the Australian cricket team with Andrew McDonald at the moment. So we're watching, Cricket Unfiltered's watching. All right. So, we've had a lot of white ball cricket to start this summer, Paul. Well, it started in winter, basically, up north in Australia with those series against the West Indies and New Zealand. But now it's the test time. Australia's test summer begins next week. in Western Australia at the WACA on Wednesday. It'll be the first test, and then they moved to Adelaide for a day-night test. And before we get into kind of the minutiae of both teams, I think it's worth saying to maybe fans that don't follow a lot of international cricket that the West Indies team are actually quite a decent test team. They've got different personnel to their white ball teams, and they've actually put together quite a handy year. So although I think Australia start heavy favourites, don't be surprised if at times West Indies matches Australia.
I've watched a lot of West Indies in Test cricket over the last sort of 6-7 years, and there's certainly been times when they have really shown a lot of promise. The memorable one was when they chased down a huge target against England in Leeds about 5 years ago, and it felt like something had happened then, and the corner had been turned. And look, realistically, they're probably never going to go back to the glory days of the 80s, but it looked like they were really heading in the right direction. I probably haven't watched them as much in the last year, but I'm not as confident as you. And I think their bowling shapes as pretty decent, but I'm really worried about their batting. I've just gone through their first class averages, and I put them in the notes, and I didn't actually label them. Question for you: if you'd seen that part of the notes, did you think they were their ages or their averages?
And now that you mention, I thought they were their numbers or their ages. I certainly didn't think it was their first class.
Plenty of numbers in the 30s, unfortunately.
The only thing is, I've been going through New South Wales first class batting averages today, and I'll tell you what, these look a lot better. So it didn't jump out at me. Just on their record, so in 2021, the West Indies played 10 tests, 5 losses, 3 wins and a draw. They lost series to Sri Lanka and South Africa. They drew with Pakistan and beat Bangladesh. So that was 2021. But then this year, they played 5 tests, 1, 3, and had 2 draws. So they're unbeaten, they beat England at home 1-0, and they beat Bangladesh at home 2-0. So they do come in a bit of form. I do think it's a fair assessment that their batting is a bit thin. Any of the batters jump out at you?
Yeah, I always look at Brathwaite because he was the ones that got that, helped them win that game. And you look, he's got an overall test average of 34. And you think, I thought he would have, I thought he would have been better than that. Shai Hope's no longer in the setup. He was someone that looked promising then as well. But yeah, you look at them, Brathwaite 34, averaging, Blackwood's averaging 31. A couple of them who haven't played as many tests, I've just gone for their first class average, to be fair. So Bonner, first class average of 29. Brooks, first class average of 30. Chand, first class average of 34. Roston Chase's test average has dropped to 27. It was once in the 50s. De Silva, the keeper, first class average of 31. Jason Holder, first class average of 31, but test average of 31, but a very good bowling average of 28. Myers, 32, first class, and the reserve wicketkeeper, 30. So there's not a great deal there that suggests that their batting is going to do a hell of a lot. Hope to be proven wrong, but that does concern me.
Yes, well, I guess one of the big news is Tangerine Chanderpaul has been selected. So Shivnarine Chanderpaul's son.
Sorry, I'm an idiot. I abbreviated him to Chanderpaul to Chand. That's ridiculous.
That's all right. So Chanderpaul was the second leading run scorer in the West Indies Championship this year, averaging 73.16. So yeah, that's interesting. I remember Shivnarine very well. So nice to see his son back. Look, I've got 3 West Indies players to watch. 3 that jumped out at me. Firstly, it's Kyle Mayers. Now, he made a match-winning 210 not out on debut. The West Indies were chasing 395 against Bangladesh last year, and they got it. So he's had a good start to his career. He averages 38.9 with 250s and 200s, and he's also a handy bowler. He's taken 26 wickets, and his best bowling 5 for 18. So that's not a bad record for Mayers, averaging almost 40 in Test cricket. 26 wickets. And that innings against Bangladesh will go down in history as, one of the finest 4th innings in history. The Jason Holder, Paul, there's not many genuine all-rounders at the moment in Test cricket, but if you're averaging almost 30 with the bat and you're averaging over 30 with the bat and under 30 with the ball, that makes you a pretty tough prospect.
Yeah, he's a wonderful cricketer. I like him a lot.
Yeah, Holder's taken 142 wickets, and he's also got 3 Test centuries. So, yep, good record for him. And the other one for me is Alzari Joseph. He's a right arm quick bowler. He's played 22 Tests, taken 62 wickets at almost 35, but I think he's just got enough pace on the Wacker and the Adelaide Oval to maybe trouble some of the Australian top order. And, when you pair him with maybe Kemar Roach and Seals, I think that could be, a bit of a handful for our top order.
Yeah, certainly their bowling is a lot better than their batting. And apologies again for saying Chan. It was Chandapur. I was trying to be quick with the way I wrote it down. I agree with you, but I also think that from just his stats, Anderson Phillip looks like a handy prospect. He's got a bowling average of 21 and a strike rate of 37 in first class cricket. Now he's only played 19 matches, but that's still it's not no sample size. Seals has a bowling average of 22 in his 9 tests and pretty similar in first class cricket as well. So not a whole lot of sample size there on either of them, but they certainly do look promising. Roach, still a fine bowler. He's 34, has a pretty good record. And Joseph's first class average is 28. So that's an indicator that he's a pretty handy bowler. So, and Raymond Reefer as well, has a pretty good record. He's the bowling all-rounder, bowling average of 25. Now, people might start to fall asleep when I keep on talking about numbers, but I think that's that's the source of truth. And I'd say that their batting looks ordinary. Their bowling looks potentially really good. And if you've got bowlers, then you're always in the game, especially if they happen to get better of the conditions. An upset, I'm not predicting it, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, well, judging by Australia's T20 form, you never know how they're going to play in that first Test match. I think for the West Indies to win, they'll need, a breakout batter. They'll need someone to really have a gun series, whether it's Mayers or Brathwaite, and the others can bat around. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. On the other side of things, the Australian side, I would say going into the first Test, it's one of the most least debated teams for a number of years. I mean, the top order's set. The bowling looks pretty locked in. So, I can't see many massive changes to the top order. I think it'll be, Khawaja and Warner, then Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Green, Carey, then, Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood and Lyon. I think that'll be the lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's one of the least controversial teams. It'd be good if Scott Boland could get a run at some stage, but it's a very good side, very, very good side indeed. And I think that some of the Quicks bowled a bit better in the one-day series than they did in the T20s as well.
Yeah, so that's the Australian team taking on the West Indies next Wednesday. Now, this episode of Cricket Unfiltered is brought to you by NordVPN. Now, at the moment, it's a really important issue in Australia. There's been a lot of hacks into major companies, and with NordVPN, you can feel safe because it's your one-stop shop for all things cybersecurity. It's incredibly easy, just one click and you're protected. Obviously, I use it because I'm watching sport from all over the place. I want to be safe online all the time, so I can protect up to 6 devices for the price of one coffee a month. And yeah, just with what's happened, with I'm not going to name the companies, but I think at the moment you've got to be really, really careful.
And I'm with you with the sport that with NordVPN, you can switch your virtual location to a country that is showing the sports event that you want to watch. So if you're overseas and it's an Australian event that you can't get when you're overseas, then you can flick it to back to Australia. Or if you're here and it's not being shown here, then you can flick it to the country that you need. And I've done it many, many times over the years, and you feel like a Superman. It's really cool.
Absolutely. So it's the price of a cup of coffee every month. It's a small price to pay for safety, peace of mind, and also being able to access not just sport from all over the world, but you can also watch TV shows, and all your apps from anywhere. So it's really important. So head to nordvpn.com/cricket unfiltered. That's nordvpn.com/cricket unfiltered. There you get a risk-free trial. You get a 30-day money-back guarantee. and we'll put the link to the offer in the show notes. So go in there, click on the link. You can try it out, and I think you'll be very happy with it. All right, let's move on to the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcasts. Well, we'll start with a very heavy headline, and an explosive headline that on the back of the News Corp papers. Now, this is reported in the Daily Telegraph that a former senior Cricket Australia executive is facing the possibility of jail time if convicted of 2 separate sexual assault charges involving a male colleague and another male cricket employee. Timothy Whitaker, 37, a trusted and long-serving head of communications at Cricket Australia, was before the Melbourne Magistrates Court on Thursday and charged with 2 unrelated counts of sexual assault. The first related to the alleged assault of a younger Cricket Australia employee in March 2019, and the second charge involved a different younger male cricket worker employed at Cricket Victoria in January 2016. Mr. Whitaker's lawyer indicated that he will enter a not guilty plea and will contest both charges. Well, Paul, first reaction.
Yeah, I mean, deeply concerning and a bit shocking. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I guess, there's been some discussions around the culture at Cricket Australia going back a number of years, and this won't help those discussions at all. So we'll just see how that plays out in the courts. Well, it doesn't keeps going for Cricket Australia because Justin Langer was on a podcast called The Back Chat, which is hosted by a former AFL player, Will Schofield. And the story goes that Will Schofield messaged Justin Langer when he left the position as Australian coach and said, do you want to come on my podcast to talk about your story and your career? And it took almost a year, but he's been on the podcast, The Back Chat, and some explosive quotes came out of it. What was your takeaway, Paul?
My takeaway was that I found it interesting that in the notes that you've included for our show, you had the lengthy quotes from the News Limited article, but which kind of where Langer was saying that he never got any of the feedback and it all came as a surprise. You didn't include the quotes from the Channel 9 press article, Dan Braddock's article, where it was vehemently denied that he hadn't been given sufficient warning. So I think that I know you're a massive fan of him, and I liked him as well. I still do. I think he did a lot good as Australia's coach, but he's gone, and I think that I side with the players. It seems like it probably was the right time for a change. 4 years was a long time in the job. He did a lot of good things, but I think that there were some things that they weren't overly happy with. It was the right time for the change. Now, I think whether you think that McDonald is doing a good job or not, that's a separate question. I'm not saying I don't think he's doing a good job, but it's perfectly possible to say that it was right to get rid of Langer, but it was wrong to pick McDonald. They should have picked someone else. I think that's a separate point. You can't link the two. And I'm not all that interested in it. I think it's past. That he says that he didn't get it. They said that he did. I'm content to move on.
I think there's an element to that last bit that I agree with you that it is time to move on, that this is not doing anyone any favors, whether it was right or wrong that he was ousted as coach. But so I listened to the whole interview today because I wanted to get context for the quotes and hear the tone of it. And Langer sounded great. And he was on the interview, I think, for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. And this was just a small section of it. So it certainly wasn't like he was harping on about it for a long, long time. But the context of those stories were he spoke to Tim Payne. He details the story of speaking to Tim Payne and Tim Payne giving him, brutal feedback about his coaching. And then he called Aaron Finch up afterwards, and Finchy said that he was a bit of a coward in not telling Langer that stuff to his face before. And he also had a similar conversation with Pat Cummins afterwards. And I think there is a lot of truth to the fact that people went behind Langer's back to try and get him out of the job. He can feel bitter about that. He has a right to feel bitter about that. So, yeah, that's the context of it. And I think he makes a valid point that, yeah, he was given feedback, asked to change. He changed. They won the World Cup. They won the Ashes. And then he was just offered a 6-month extension. So I can see the bitterness there. But I do, to your point, I think they need to move on. And Nick Hockley has reacted quite strongly in the press. He said, following a comprehensive process, Justin was offered a short-term contract extension, which he rejected. I am disappointed by Justin's comments, unfairly criticizing some of our players. The playing group are aware they have my full support. That was Nick Hockley.
I think if you read the News Libyan article and if you listen to that podcast, you come away thinking that, yeah, Langer's got a legitimate reason to be disappointed. You read the Herald article and you sort of think, well, actually, no, he probably did get enough feedback and he didn't take it on board. So I think it's kind of, I don't know which way it goes, but as I said, I tend to think that he probably did get some sufficient feedback for him to have changed. It didn't happen, but I reiterate, he did a lot of good things as Australian coach. I was really happy when he was appointed, and I think his tenure on the whole was a lot more good than bad. And I just kind of think, it's even if he'd done a job that no one criticised him for, after 4 years, it possibly is enough time and time to move on. So yeah, I'm happy to let it lie.
Yeah, well, Darren Lehman's always said that he stayed in the job a bit too long because of all the travel and it wears you down. So, I know you think I'm just, quoting News Corp. So Dan Brettig in the Channel 9 papers wrote today that punter will keep JL very even. One current player told the age at Sydney Morning Herald, and that's a reference to the fact that, Langer's going to be commentating on the first test at the WACA. Punter will be part of his commentary team, his good mate, and hopefully that'll simmer things down. I have no problems with Lang. Like, I think Lang is going to be fine. He's a great guy. Apparently, Brettig's reporting that he's been in contact with Cummins. So, yeah, I actually think the problem's more with the players because I was on the side where information was fed to me about Langer. So I know they were trying to get the information out. So that's why I'm always been Team JL. And, he was asked in the interview, would you coach the Australian side again? And he said he would. He doesn't know if he will. Doesn't know if it will happen. He doesn't like the idea of the travel, but he didn't rule it out. So, maybe JL will come back one day.
Maybe. Look, I think there needs to be a gap. But at some stage down the track, I'd be open to it. I think in terms of his commentary, it's going to be interesting to hear because he's a smart guy. He's got interesting things to say, but a lot of ex-players aren't good commentators because they're a bit boring and they don't realize that what they think of the insights that they have are not actually as insightful as they might think. And they need to listen to Richie Benaud's maxims of less is more and engage the brain before you speak. If Langer chooses his words carefully and only says something when he's got something to say, he could be a really good commentator. But if we hear too many of, Davey Warner, he'll be really keen to get a score today, then I'll be muting him pretty quick.
All right, so that was the headlines that Justin Langer made this week. I mean, the final bit on that was apparently Cricket Australia has sought clarification on what role Langer will have and whether he'll be directly interviewing players. And I think there was a feeling maybe some players wouldn't be comfortable with that. But I think that's complete horseshit. I mean, Langer's doing his job. If you're a professional cricketer and he's going to interview you, man up. I mean, like, what the hell? I can't answer questions from you. Oh, sorry.
Alex, you dropped a couple of catches behind the stumps today. Would you say that's possibly because of a drop in standards in the coaching staff in the last few months?
Yeah, JL, well. All right, the next headline. David Warner can appeal his ban now. A release from Cricket Australia has said that now if you're given a sanction by Cricket Australia, you can ask for a review and it'll be done with a 3-person panel. And Warner was at a KO launch earlier in the week and blew up about the fact that he's not a criminal and that it took too long for this to happen. It's taken 9 months to get to this point, basically, ruling him out of the 50-over captaincy. And if he is going to capture the big bash, it's going to be, just right up to beforehand that we get a decision. So again, Cricket Australia, the first 3 headlines, none of them, they cover themselves in glory. I'm sorry.
Warner's got a great point. How did it take 9 months not to say yes, he's back, but for them to say we can now consider whether we're going to allow him to be captain again? It's as though they are beholden to some higher power. They don't, guys. You're in charge. You run the game. You can do whatever the hell you like. It's not like people on Mars are going to say, "Oh no, you can't do that." I just find that incredible. It's like there's no higher court. Just go in, have a board meeting, and make the decision in one day and say, right, he is eligible to be considered. Then if you then decide, no, we're still not going to consider him, well, that's fine. But don't have 9 months waiting to decide whether you can decide. Isn't that weird?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it was tactical. I think it was to put it off as long as you can. And they've succeeded. So I think he's got a point. He's not a criminal. He made a mistake on the field, and he should be given a chance to should be eligible for leadership now.
I mean, you may well be right. It may be tactical. There's kind of no good reason for it. If it's tactical, it's like, come on. Are you that afraid of saying no to him? If it's not tactical, then what is it? Just bumbling incompetence. But surely a mature organization could have been able to say, yes, we have decided that we will consider your application. And then 2 weeks later, we've considered it and we've decided that no, you're not allowed to be. And we'll be upfront about it, and you might not like it, but here are the reasons. Away we go. Rather than have they deliberately dragged their feet for 9 months so they can say now, oh yeah, absolutely, it's fine. You can be captain, but we've already got a captain of the 50 over side, so you can't be that kind of thing. God, just not that hard.
No. All right, the next cricket headline. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, Paul, most of Australia isn't, but Australia beat England 3-0 in a recent 50 over series. Incredible. And history was made. We had our 27th and 28th one-day international skipper. Now, Pat Cummins captained his the first match, his first game of skipper, and in the second game, apparently they drew straws in the dressing room and they decided to give Hazelwood the captaincy.
Yeah, look, this has to be a line in the sand moment. That I understand the excuses. That presumably this was the last series that they were obliged still in those old bilateral things to have this series. They didn't have it for the fun of it. Yeah. So it's kind of like their hands are tied. And yet the calendar's a nightmare. They had to squeeze it in somewhere. This was the time to squeeze it in. It was cold. I was actually in Melbourne that night. It was cold. It wasn't a night for cricket. And of course, the World Cup had just occurred. Who was going to be interested in it? But still, to get 10,000 to the MCG, it's the lowest ever crowd for a one day involving Australia at the MCG. That is pathetic, really. And cricket has to stop having glorified friendlies all the time. No other sport does it. When football has a friendly, it's like, this is a friendly. Everyone knows it's a friendly. It's a one-off. We know what it is. Cricket has all these games disguised as matches that mean something. And I was saying jokingly, I said the other episode jokingly that in a month's time, no one would know the result. I might have been too generous. I don't even think that Josh Hazelwood would know the result even now. It's been 2 days since it happened. It's yeah, it's just. I mean, how can you have a rivalry that has been so storied and so successful, playing at one of the great amphitheaters of the sport, and get 10,000 people turning up? And I knew a guy who was only going because he had mates tickets to the members, and he was like, otherwise there's no way I'd be going in hell to this game. So yeah, there are plenty of excuses, but this has to be the line in the sand. They can't damage the brand like this ever again.
Yeah, and I've got pretty knowledgeable people that contest the figures that we've been given, that they don't think 15,000 people were at the SCG on Saturday, and they don't think 10,000 were at the MCG. So you potentially have people that bought tickets and then just thought, bugger it, I'm not even going to go. It's that uninteresting.
I think the crowd figures are look, if they're proven not to be genuine, I'll be the first to. I'd be appalled if they did that. And I remember back in the day when there was some rugby league crowds that were a bit dodgy, and the Daily Telegraph actually took a photo of every section of the ground and they counted them and said, no, you've clearly not told the truth. I just think here that all that they would do is, as someone walks in and has their ticket scanned, it would be sent to a central database. So I don't think they've made the numbers up. Now, if you're going to make it up, they should have said 90,000.
Like Qatar. Oh,
Yeah.
sold out 120 at the G. It's a record. But I don't know. I don't know if you heard my Media Mad Menace this Monday, but I was actually really pissed off that Hazelwood was made skipper. And I know your theory is that captaincy is not that important. And I'm not talking about tactics, but I'm talking about the message that sends to the public, the message that sends to the other players, the message that sends to domestic cricket. Josh Hazelwood's never skippered any team since schoolboy level. They had Steve Smith, Travis Head, Alex Carey, Mitch Marsh. If you're a punter that turns up and you pay $150 to sit there, oh, we've just rolled out Hazelwood to give him a crack. I mean, what message is that sending?
I actually agree with you. Now, I don't think the captain, the identity of the captain matters that much as to how the team goes, but that's a separate point. I think on this point, I 100% agree with you. And it's more to the point of, yet again, it's showing that these fixtures don't mean anything. I don't want to keep on harping back to the old days, but for years, if it was a one-day game, Alan Border was the captain, and it really mattered. And you knew the 11 because they were going to have their very, very best players in there, and it was a real game. Now they're just doing everything they can to devalue these matches, all with good reason. Like, it's great for him to get some captaincy experience. It's not a bad thing, but again, it's another. Was it Josh Butler didn't play in
the second match? I think
in the second match, and it's like if you're going to the game, you think, oh, that's another reason that I shouldn't have turned up to this. Pat Cummins isn't playing either. It's like I understand that you want to rest players, you want to rotate, you want to do all these things, but there comes a point where you got to say that's another example of why these games just shouldn't have been played.
And Hazelwood was talking about the leadership group, and forgive me for those who heard my rant, but I mean, I said he was the 28th ODI skipper. This shouldn't be about giving someone captaincy experience. This shouldn't be about a leadership group. It's a coveted position, Australian skipper, and they had Smith there who's done it before, so they could have avoided this, just given him the job for the day, and it wouldn't have been making someone a first-time Aussie skipper. And I think it's denigrating the position of Australian captaincy. I think Bailey, Donamaid, and McDonald should take a good bloody hard look at themselves after that. It's just like schoolboy stuff. Oh, you have a go today as skipper.
Well, it raises the question: what is the future going to look like when, in future summers, the test matches are fine, and this summer we had the World Cup, and that was great. But when it's a regular summer, what are we going to do aside from the test matches? Are we going to have these 3-match series against other countries? The precedent's almost been set now. That look, if it's India, the crowd will still be big because of the Indian fans will turn up. But if it's other matches, I don't know. I mean, short of bringing back the Tri Series or finding some other way of having a competition with more than 2 teams in a short form format, I just don't see the future of 50-over cricket in Australia.
No, I agree. And I think if they were to want to play sort of domestic series in Australia, a T20 Tri Series might be the way to go. I don't think that's perfect, but if you get 3 teams here, do a little tournament over sort of 10 days, 2 weeks, that might have some legs.
Absolutely. And I remember that when Ramiz Raja, when he was became in charge of the Pakistan Cricket Board, was promoting an idea of having Australia, England, India, and Pakistan playing a regular T20 series. And everyone was saying, oh, God, last thing we need is even more cricket. But that's the sort of cricket that I want. That if we could have not just a Tri Series, but if we could have get New Zealand involved, let them host some games, get as many as we can and make it a regular thing, that we have a 3-team, 4-team, 5-team series, a sort of a mini World Cup, and make it worth something. That'd be fun. I'd be interested in watching that.
And we've also seen now with the associate nations that they're more competitive now. So you'd be able to draw on a lot of teams that would love to come here and play.
Very good point. Very good point. You could get all those teams would say yes, and you could have it. Make it a 7 or 8 team tournament, and you have Ireland and Scotland and a few other, Netherlands and Namibia and a few other these nations, plus India and England or whomever you can get. It would be really good.
So in the third one-day international, and that is the real shame of these, that there were some significant records broken, and they will go down as being played in a meaningless series. So David Warner scored his 19th one-day international century, his first century in any format for Australia in 3 years, and he's now second for Australia behind Ricky Ponting in one-day international centuries. Warner 19. I think he's got a long way to go to catch punter. And then Australia made 355 for 5. in the third one-day international. That's the first team total of past 350 across 150 men's ODIs. The previous highest was 344 for 8 by the ICC World 11. So, significant milestone. It was also their highest ever score against England in a one-day international. And Warner and Head put on 269, which is the highest stand for any ODIs in any wicket at the MCG. So, I mean, they're big records.
They are, and they would have once been massive, as you say. And then the margin of victory as well. I felt sorry for England. Like, they did deserve to have a week off and celebrate properly winning the World Cup. To be suddenly at a windswept, cold MCG in front of no one, having to chase down 350, and they didn't make the greatest fist of it either. I felt a bit for them.
One thing I will say is I thought Moeen Ali was a bit shit beforehand. Like, I think you've got to actually pretend. I mean, I think if you're a senior figure, as much as they wanted to be on the plane home, maybe bitch and moan about it afterwards. Like, take it up with your board. Don't at a press conference say we don't want to be playing. Like, I think that's unprofessional. I think it's not good. Like, yeah, I didn't like that at all. Like, I'm sure they wanted to go home, but in the end, you just play. And if you're really upset about it, sort it out afterwards.
It's something that you'd think that a players' association should have raised many months beforehand. And so, wait a minute, what's this? What's this you've got pigeoned in here? And if they said, look, we've got absolutely no choice, then get the players together and say, look, we realize this sucks, but these are the reasons we have to do it. So please put on a brave show. I agree with you, Dennis.
All right, the next headline. So we've just finished a wonderful T20 World Cup, and they've announced the format of the 2024 T20 World Cup that's being played in the Caribbean and the USA. Paul, we've got to get there. USA, baby, 2024. Here we come.
Good.
So this is a really good format. I'm really curious what you think, Paul. So there's 4 groups of 5 in the first round. So that's 20 teams. There's no pre-qualifiers like we've had that week beforehand. So it's just straight 4 groups of 5. Then the top 2 from those 5 groups. With those 4 groups of 5. So you would have 8 teams going through to the next round, which is a Super 8. And then they're divided into 2 groups of 4. And then the top 2 from those 2 groups of 4 go through to the semifinals and the final. What do you think?
Yeah, I really like the idea of the fact that that sort of preliminary round where the teams that didn't quite make it play, that's gone. I think it served a purpose for a little while, but I think that it does mean that the tournament begins with a really cold opener, and this tournament took a while to get going because there's all these games on that people weren't really aware of. And as you said earlier in the show, I think that the so-called lesser nations have now shown that they are well worthy of being in the main draw. So it's all good. I tried to find, and I couldn't before this show, what happens into the Super 8s. So assume that let's say Group 1, Australia and, for argument's sake, Sri Lanka go through to the second phase. Does the Australia-Sri Lanka match that they played still count? Does it carry over, or does Australia?
This is nightmares to the 1999 50 over World Cup format.
I know.
Super Sixes, and I really hope not. Please, I hope they just abandon that where you bring the points through, because that was a stinker. Because that effectively ruined matches, because people that brought enough points through could then, know they could do a bit less to qualify.
Well, it was Australia against the West Indies. It was in Australia's interest to get a really, really narrow victory over them, so that I've forgotten the exact permutations now. It's 23 years ago, and I was amazed that Steve Waugh and Bevan had the wherewithal and the gumption and the knowledge to actually do it. They got to within 10 runs and then just had took forever over the final. And I don't blame the players. You got to do what's right. It's sad though, because it did make a lot of sense. And what's the alternative? Does Australia then have to play Sri Lanka again in the Super 8s? That sounds a bit.
Well, no, you go into different groups. So because you go through the Super 8 is 2 groups of 4. So then split. So you would think though Sri Lanka and Australia were going to separate groups.
Okay, everyone. The previous 3 minutes, just ignore that. I was just
no, but I mean, it's just been announced, and I'm sure people will not know the format either. So it 2024. It's only 2 years away. Get ready for it.
Great format. No problems with it. Sorry for misunderstanding.
Now, next thing, and this is going to be a really quick one, but this is a cautionary tale to the IPL. A report has come out that they are looking at bringing in the super sub that we've seen in the Big Bash, the floating power play. And I would say, do not do it, IPL. They stink. They're awful. The power surge sucks. The super sub didn't work. They had to scrap it. And what I don't like about the power play now is, I like the 6 overs at the front where everyone knows it's a bit of a slog and you want to be there for it. It's, unmissable. So they've taken that away. If you're a casual fan that goes to the Big Bash, the WBBL, you don't know what's going on. All of a sudden you see the field in the 14th over and you're like, what's this all about? So IPL, do not make the same mistake.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I've said this many times, I would be okay with it in Australia if they still had the first 6 overs as the power play, and then you got a further 2. And I say this, and people go, "Oh, yeah, you just want bowlers to be bowling machines and all this." But I do think that in T20 cricket in Australia, the back 14 overs, sometimes there is a little bit too much of, oh, well, I'll take a single. That's nowhere near as bad as it is in 50-over cricket, but I think it could do with livening up a bit. So I'd like to see the original 6 plus 2. But I think if they did that in India on their small grounds, it would get a bit farcical. So, yeah, I agree with you. Don't do it. But what do you think of my idea, Minners, of that they have, what did I call it? I wrote it in the notes.
Strike demander.
The strike demander.
I like it.
I reckon it would be pretty cool if maybe 3 times during the match, the batting side can determine who's on strike. So in that final over, when you've got someone who's been batting with the tail and they're 70 off 30, and you've got number 10 has come out to bat, and you think, oh, we don't want that person to be on strike. And then when they do get on strike, it kind of ruins the game. The strike demand goes, no, I shall be on strike, and I will walk down here and take command. I reckon that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, like they need some like prop or something to make it dramatic. Well, just on the power surge and the power play, one idea that I had was if you really want to liven up the last 10 overs, actually make it set. So say overs 1 to 4 is the power play and overs 11 and 12 are the power play, or whatever you decide. So you can actually tell fans that. Though every game it's the same. So once you watch a few Big Bash games or IPL games, it's not, like it. And what annoys me is they did it in 50-over cricket. They tried it and it didn't stick around. Like, stop making the same mistakes.
I agree, because it also would stop the speculation. I find that when is they going to take it? It's like, that speculation is really, really boring. I'd be happy with that, if they made it 11 and 12. But for the IPL, they should get rid of the strategic timeout as well. That's I know they probably make about $400 billion as a result of having it, but it really does. When you're trying to watch it 2 a.m, it's in Sydney, it's hard.
And what I do like is the IPL wants to change their purple and orange caps to, rather than most runs and most wickets, to best strike rate and best economy rate, and that actually makes perfect sense.
I agree with that. Although I'd be happy if they just introduced 2 new caps. Why not have 4? As long as the best strike rate and the best economy rate, there are some reasonably stringent minimum requirements that you don't want someone having bowled 10 overs and gets it for that. You've got to work out something to say, okay, they have to have been pretty much a major contributor. You don't want a part-timer sneaking in and winning it.
I also want to go the other way. So like a dunce cap, like if you're having a real stinker of a tournament, like worst strike rate and most expensive, you have to wear like a joker's cap. And also if you're batting and there's 3 dot balls in a row, like the coach can literally come out and like yank you off the field. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
All right, staying on to 2020 cricket. I won't go too in deep with the WBBL because as we're recording, they're actually playing. But the WBBL top 4 was the Sixers, the Adelaide Strikers, the Brisbane Heat, and the Hobart Hurricanes. So that was the top 4. Player of the tournament was Ash Gardner. The young gun of the tournament was Tess Flintoff. On Saturday, the Sydney Sixers host the grand final at North Sydney Oval. So that's going to be a fantastic occasion. For those keeping score at home, when I gave my top 4 teams of the WBPL, I got half right and half wrong. Where I went wrong was the Scorchers missed out, which is a real surprise because they've got a stacked lineup. So I think I had the Strikers just outside the top four, and they ended up sneaking in. And also the Renegades, I got that wrong. I said they'd be top of the table, and I think they finished somewhere near the bottom. I will say in my preview, I said Harmanpreet Kaur would win them a few games, and she ended up being ruled out of the tournament with an injury. So I think I get a mulligan there. But Paul, I believe you went to the WBBL.
I did. Last Saturday night, saw the Sydney Derby at North Sydney Oval. Ash Gardner was brilliant for on the field, smashing the ball all over the place. But I just thought I'd just say just my impression. First WBBL game I've been to for a couple of years, and my impression is really good. I thought it was a fantastically organised occasion. I went with my wife and daughter, my wife's cousin and his wife, and their daughter as well. They're from Scotland. Not a whole lot of cricket knowledge permeating prior to this, and the kids loved it.
Not much more here, mate.
I know that Douglas, the guy, he's learning very quickly. His cricket knowledge is coming along a treat. G'day, Douglas, if you're listening. But if I think the two girls had a really good time, and I've forgotten how much the ancillary stuff really makes a difference for kids. Like they love the face painting. They love the signs, the 4 and 6 signs that in my, curmudgeonly old thing that I am is, oh, why they got them? Well, I now know why. The kids absolutely love that. They had a petting zoo there, which I didn't see, but that's quite cool. They had apples for the kids. My daughter now loves apples more than she's ever loved them before. And it was just a lovely atmosphere. My wife was impressed by the fact that there was quite a lot of groups of young sort of teenage guys who'd gone to watch it, which is another sign of just how far the women's game has come. So Cricket Australia has done a wonderful job. And I remember when it wasn't that long ago, I reckon sort of early 2000s, a day of a test match where that nothing happened in the first hour, and the ads that came on during the first drinks break, that had a jingle, a song from one of the TV ads that was on at the time. And I almost got up and started dancing. Oh, this is more like it. This is really entertaining. And I suddenly realized, oh, this is an ad. But back then it was like, we'll put the cricket on, and if you don't like it, we could not care less. Now they're really going out of their way to make it as family friendly and thrusting the entertainment at you. Some of the older people go, oh, there's too much music, but fantastic. The one bad note, and I don't want to harp on it, but the food situation was really bad. And it's a pity given everything else they'd done was so good that the lineup for the food was ridiculously long. The options were terrible. And I didn't eat any, but those that did said the chips are some of the worst chips they've ever consumed ever. And we would have brought food along but
nothing worse than bad chips. Nothing worse than bad chips, Paul.
Exactly. And we should have been more organized and brought our own sandwiches and everything, but we weren't because people had been at work. It just didn't happen. And when it's a 4-hour or so sporting event that occurs across dinner time, Cricket Australia, don't say it's arm's length. Don't blame the ground and say, oh, it's up to them. Get involved like you have done with all these other elements that I've praised you for, and make something better with the food, and so that you're not lining up forever, and that it's half decent and half palatable. And then I'd give it a massive tick. If you are going to the final, don't drive. There's not much parking around North Sydney. That's the other difficulty of North Sydney Oval. Get there on public transport. But I urge you, if it hasn't sold out yet, buy some tickets and go to the final on Saturday night.
Well, that's beautiful to hear, Paul, because that's what I always feel about the WBBL and the BBL, that it has a beautiful atmosphere. When we grew up going to the SCG in the 90s, and don't get me wrong, I loved it too, but it was beer swilling blokes, abuse, piss being thrown in the air, not the sort of environment you would take a young child to. But the WBBL and the BBL is the exact opposite. And you actually leave feeling, better than when you went in. You've just got that warm feeling.
Yeah, and we were standing at one point. I stood with the two girls right on the fence, and we're watching it seeing it up close. Afterwards, as I knew they would, the players all went and signed and did selfies and everything, and it was just really cool. Like I knew it would be, and I knew they would do that, but still seeing it was very impressive.
Yeah, agree. All right, that was the WBBL, and I hope to do a wrap of the WBBL tournament. I did an episode with Brittany Carter a couple of weeks ago, so I'll definitely be doing another one of those to look back at the whole tournament after the final. Well, I got to say, Paul, I'm worried. I'm legit worried now about the Big Bash. The blows keep coming. It was I would say, unsuccessful auction. The recruiting had not worked that well, and now on the eve of the tournament, players are dropping like flies. So we had Glenn Maxwell broke his leg. Now David Willey has pulled out for the Thunder, citing workload management. Liam Livingston has pulled out of the Renegades after being selected in the test side and being picked up for another league overseas. And then Laurie Evans, who was part of the Scorchers winning team last year, has failed a drug test that was taken in August 2022. So he's tested positive for trace amounts of a banned substance. And he's been axed by the Scorchers. I mean, that goes on top of all the other people that aren't coming. I mean, I have real concerns that this Big Bash, like previous tournaments, is going to be thin on talent. And I turned on today the Abu Dhabi T10 League. I put that on in the background, and I'm like, wow, this is full of stars. Why not at the Big Bash?
Yeah, I think your pessimism is well founded. I hope that we're both wrong, but I just get the sense that it's going to be a little bit in the background, isn't it? That at the end of the season, it'll be once again talk of, poor crowds, poor TV ratings, that the NBL and the A-League were kind of given a leg up as a result. I still think it's got so much to offer. If it should never have been taken off Channel 10. Channel 7 do a good job, but with not every game on there, and it hasn't got that magic that 10 had, needs to get that back somehow. But I don't know. The way that TV deals are going, I don't know. I can't see it getting back to all Big Bash games being on free to air. If anything, they're talking about, what are the Channel 10 and Paramount are talking about some sort of deal. I mean, I still just don't think Australia's ready to. We joke that some my friends and me that the next one will be like Fisher and Paykel. You'll have to watch it on your dishwasher or something.
Your microwave. Everyone's standing in their kitchen watching.
If you buy such and such a microwave, you get a 10-game deal and you watch it on the screen. It's like we're not quite as a country in the streaming era yet. I know that people our age and younger are, and we stream everything, but there's still that hardcore people that just needs to be on free to air, and it's every game needs to be on. The network needs to love it, and they should have. The morning show should be featuring all the players who are coming up, and it should just kind of, I think it could recapture that vibe. I just think that this summer it might not.
Yeah, I heard someone from Media Week talking about how actually recently in the T20 World Cup, there was a match that was on free to air and KO streaming, and actually the streaming numbers were massive. So I think it's growing. I actually think, and this is not because Jaleesa Apps, who is part of this podcast and will be coming back now that she's back in the country, works for Paramount at Channel 10. But I actually think that's not a bad solution, because you could put it on their free-to-air networks, and then you've got the streaming platform to go with it. Now, the streaming platform is inferior to KO's at the moment, but if CBS and Paramount threw a shit ton of money at it, then I'm sure they could get it ready. And then you could have everything on one spot, on free to air all the time, all the games on the one streaming platform, and keep it simple for the public.
I'm optimistic that even if this year it has another bad year, that the Big Bash is still a great product. And like you said, if they do something like that, clever, something clever to give it a revamp and a refresh, that it still can come surging back. I just feel that maybe this year is not going to be the year where it does that. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you. Won't be this year. And let me get this straight. I love it. I mean, I'll watch as many games as I can. I'm talking about the casual fan, but eventually they're going to have to cut the games to compete with the other leagues. All right. That was the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcasts. After the break, we will get into Can't Let It Go. All right, you're listening to Cricket Unfiltered. It's Can't Let It Go time. That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to the keeper. Paul, I've got a couple, and I've also got a new segment. But what's your Can't Let It Go?
Just from Game 3, that one where Zampa went for the review, and he was confident that he had his man LBW. And then Hawkeye showed the ball deviating substantially and missing the stumps. And all the players spontaneously roared with laughter, mocking Hawkeye and sort of saying that there's no way that the ball could have spun that far. And my take on this is, and unless I've missed it in the press today, why don't the ICC or the broadcasters come out and answer those criticisms? Either say, yeah, we actually got it wrong and we're not perfect. You guys were right. That would be a difficult thing for them to have to admit. But I'm all for transparency. And if they got it wrong, just say they got it wrong. But if they got it right, as I think they probably did, because to me it looked in the small distance that the ball moved between bouncing and hitting the pad, it looked then that the projection looked perfectly straightforward to me. And why would they get it wrong? You know, the technology is very, very well established. Come out and prove that they got it right. Bring Adam Zampa up and show him the metrics behind it so that he can come and say, oh, actually, yeah, you guys, you got it right. And I'm always on about this, but I don't know why they don't take those two options rather than just allow it to just exist in a vacuum that now everyone's like, oh, yeah, Hawkeye had a shocker there, ha, 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 when it probably didn't.
Far too logical, Paul. That's the issue with what you're suggesting there. It was very funny, their reaction afterwards, like Zampa, like I've never spun a ball that far, and yeah, it was pretty funny. All right, so my can't let it go is Phoebe Litchfield, who was on this podcast in the off season, has been selected in the Australian squad for the first time. She's going to India on a 5-match T20 tour that's next month. So congratulations to Phoebe Litchfield. Sean
She
Flegler,
looked really good the other night as well when I watched her.
Yeah, she's a great player.
Short little cameo.
Sean Flegler said that one of the reasons she's been selected is because they want to give some of these young players experience in India because there's going to be more tours there in the future. And also in that squad, Kim Garth, former Ireland international, has now qualified for Australia. She's been selected, so a dual international. Congratulations to her.
She's a good bowler as well. Not that Litchfield's a bowler, but yeah.
Now, in honor of the fact that, and for all our American listeners, it's Thanksgiving. Pretty much while we're recording this, actually, it's Thanksgiving in the States. So, in honor of that, I've come up with my turkey of the week. Gobble gobble gobble. And my turkey of the week is Glenn Maxwell. And he was on the Cricket Australia podcast talking about how he broke his leg. And guess what, Paul? He fell over and broke his leg. I mean, there was nothing more to the story. So that was the story. But then Maxie just went on, and they should just gag him, like literally put a ball gang in his mouth and say, shut up. Because then he started talking about the T20 World Cup, and he just rolled out the excuses. He said they were unlucky because they lost. They only lost one game like they did last year. He said that T20 cricket is fickle. He said that the rain out to England cost them, blah, blah, blah. He basically just made a ton of excuses and actually was never culpable, never talked about the fact the team wasn't at its best. And now I'm actually starting to see why he frustrates coaches, why he hasn't reached his potential, why Steve Smith said a few years ago he should train harder, because he says stupid shit like that.
I haven't heard it, but I mean, on the face of it, and I said this before, yes, they were very, very disappointing in the World Cup, but what he said is true. They were unlucky. As I said a year ago, they got more than their fair share of luck by winning the toss and bowling in the semi and the final. This time round, they had their match washed out against England. They really had a really shocking start to the game against New Zealand. And apart from that, they didn't do too badly. Well, last year's World Cup, they got obliterated by England in the group phase. If another game had been washed out and had then prevented them from making the final, then back in the UAE, it would have been exactly the same as it was here. I think that it is a fickle game. Things do turn on a dime. That's not to say that there were not things that they could have done a whole lot better and a whole lot differently, but they were lucky last time. They were unlucky this time. I think that's fair enough.
I don't disagree. I mean, it was just excuse after excuse. I'm sick of hearing it. The fact is they didn't finish off Ireland. They didn't finish off Afghanistan. In the T20 World Cup last year, they hammered, I can't remember which team it was. They got there in like 6 or 7 overs. It was incredible. So, okay, the match was rained out, but you can't just roll out all these excuses after you got comprehensively hammered in the first game. So it just annoyed me. I'm like, okay. And then he did go on to sort of clarify what he meant about like it doesn't mean anything. And he sort of said his comments were taken out of context. And I've listened to both interviews, like this one on the podcast, and when he made those comments. And, I think he just didn't express himself that well when he said it doesn't mean anything. I think he was saying worrying about it won't do anything, but it came out wrong. So I'm willing to back off.
That's how I took it. I think there was an overreaction to his initial. I think that was clear. I think people wanted to make more of it than there was in that when he said the first time.
Anyway, he's my turkey of the week. Congratulations, Glenn Maxwell. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone in America. Paul, we have smashed it. A great episode of Cricket Unfiltered brought to you by NordVPN. Head to the show notes for the link. Paul, anything you'd like to say goodbye before we go?
No, just looking forward to the test matches this summer. Hopefully the West Indies can marshal that bowling attack to really give Australia a bit of a scare. And then the big 3 tests against South Africa are going to be fascinating as well as we get to Boxing Day.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, listeners. Rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. Send us any messages. We'd love to hear from you. But Paul and I will be back next week. Oh, and I'm dropping the Wasim Akram interview next week. So there'll be 2 episodes. You get Wasim Akram early on in the week. And then Paul and I will have to discuss when we're recording because the test starts Wednesday. But thanks, everybody, for listening. See you, Paul.
See ya. Bye.